My name is Patsy Bryson. I am Chair of the Board of Zoning Appeals for the Town of Hilton Head Island. I call to order the Town of Hilton Head Island Board of Zoning Appeals meeting for Monday, January 24, 2022 at 2:30 p.m. Ms. Haley, are we in compliance with the South Carolina Freedom of Information Act, also known as FOIA?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
Thank you, ma'am. And Ms. Haley, will you call the roll for us?
Certainly. Mr. Christian,
Present.
Mr. Walzak,
I see him. There he is.
thank you. Ms. Loudermilk,
Present.
Dr. Ponder,
Present.
Mr. Johnson,
Present.
Mr. Fingerhut,
Present.
Ms. Bryson.
Present. Thank you, ma'am. We have a quorum. At this time, I'd like to welcome all, welcome board members, staff members, Town Attorney Curtis Coltrane, applicants and their representatives. See Town Council Member Glenn Stanford on the line. I don't see anybody else at this point. Other members and members of the public, we welcome you to this meeting of the Board of Zoning Appeals. Today, we have a few matters before us. On the agenda, we have two variance requests and a special exception request. I would note that on the published agenda, there are two items under new business which have been postponed. Those items are the following. I can find exactly which ones. Looking at my outline, Ms. Haley. Let's see. Here we go. There's a variance request from Nathan Stewart of Cranston Engineering for a variance regarding parking spaces for electric vehicle charging station, and that is postponed to our February meeting. That is item 9C. Sorry about that. My outline is so long. And then item 9E, a public hearing on another variance request. This one is from John and Nicholas Crago for a variance regarding specific conditions for principal uses for proposed screening outside storage of bicycles in the light commercial district. And that matter is also postponed to our February meeting. Those postponements were granted by me pursuant to request of the applicants and pursuant to the authority granted to the chair under our rules of procedure. The other item that I will cover with regard to our board procedures are the following elements. First of all, we try to ensure a fair and impartial hearing for applicants and for town staff members. In order to do that, we follow both procedural and substantive due process. In following procedural and substantive due process, we follow the requirements of the land management ordinance and the BZA rules of procedure, the requirements set forth in the statute as well. The two types of matters that we will consider today are variances, and that description of variances and the standards for variances are set forth in section 16-2-103S of the land management ordinance, and also in Article 7, Roman numeral 7 of our rules of procedure. In addition, we haven't considered one of these in a while. We'll be considering a special exception request, and the standards for that are found in section 16-2-103E of the land management ordinance, and in Article 8, Roman numeral 8 of our rules of procedure. So any questions about the procedures that we will follow today? And I hope that Mr. Coltrane will steer us in the right direction if we go astray. The next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. And I would first ask if any staff members or members of the board have any changes to the agenda. Hearing and seeing none, I would ask for a motion to approve the agenda.
Move approval, Madam Chair.
Mr. Christian, is there a second? Second by Ms. Loudermilk. Ms. Haley, if you will call a roll on that motion.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak, Mr. Walzak?
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
thank you. Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut? Mr.
For the
Finger-
motion, excuse me.
Thank you. Ms. Bryson?
For the motion.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes of the board meeting of September 27, 2021. I would ask if there are any changes or corrections to the minutes of September 27, 2021. Hearing and seeing none, I would ask for a motion to approve those minutes.
So
Move
moved.
acceptance.
Mr. Christian and second by Mr. Fingerhut. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, Ms. Haley, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item on the agenda is approval of the minutes of the board for November 22nd, 2021. Are there any changes or corrections to those minutes? Hearing and seeing none, I would ask for a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
Motion by
Second.
Mr. Fingerhut, second by, I'm sorry, I didn't catch who it was. That used to
Charlie.
be Mr. Walczak. Thank you, sir. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none, Ms. Haley, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you, ma'am. The next item on the agenda is appearance by citizens. Ms. Haley, do we have any appearances by citizens?
Yes, Madam Chair, there is one citizen signed up to speak during the public hearing for the variance and the special exception request by Mr. Chet Williams on behalf of Beach Walk. At the appropriate time, we will call on Mr. Barry Johnson for his comments. Additionally, public comments were submitted electronically via the town's open town hall portal. The portal closed at 1:30 today, and the comments of record were shared with the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. And the chair acknowledges receipt by the board of the comments of the public on the town's portal. The next item on the agenda is unfinished business. The chair is not aware of any. Any board members aware of any unfinished business? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to new business. And the first item under new business is a public hearing on variance request 002417-2021, a request from Chester C. Williams Esquire on behalf of Beach Walk Hilton Head LLC for a variance from LMO section 16-4-102B5B, use specific conditions to allow an outdoor commercial recreation use other than a water park to not have the required direct vehicular access to a minor arterial street. The address is 40 Waterside Drive with a parcel number of R552-018-000-202D as in David, quadruple zero. And I will now open the public hearing. And before calling upon staff for presentation, I will disclose for the record that I do live within this zoning district. I have played miniature golf, but I do believe that I can render a fair and impartial decision in this matter. And now, Ms. Dixon, I guess you're taking over to make the presentation by staff. Staff is allowed under our rules of procedure 20 minutes to make the presentation, followed by questions of board members. Then there'll be a presentation by the applicant of the same amount of time, an opportunity for rebuttal, and also public comment. And Ms. Haley, as always, will be our kind and gentle timekeeper. Ms. Dixon, you may proceed.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that you can see my PowerPoint. Okay, can you see the PowerPoint up on your screen?
Mhm.
Yes, ma'am.
Great, okay. So I'll be presenting variance 2417-2021, which is a variance for a miniature golf facility located at the Beach Walk property. The applicant is Chester C. Williams on behalf of Beach Walk Hilton Head LLC. He's requesting a variance from LMO section 16.4.102B5B, which is the use specific conditions, in order to develop a miniature golf course facility on the property. A miniature golf course is considered an outdoor commercial recreation use, which is permitted by special exception and requires direct vehicular access to a minor arterial street. The property is located on Waterside Drive, which is not a minor arterial street. The subject property is located on the south end of the island and is surrounded by the Waterside by Spinnaker Resort to the north and west, the Cordillo Volita development to the east, and Enchiladas Cafe and a small shopping center containing the Watusi restaurant, Pedals Bicycles, and a welcome center to the south. Is everyone familiar with where the property is located? Great. The site is currently developed as the former Beach Walk Hotel, which was approved in 1987 as a 94-room hotel and is part of the Waterside, also known as Town Center, PD2 overlay district. The ownership of the property was converted to a condominium regime in 2006, and Beach Walk Hilton Head LLC now owns all of the units in the regime. The hotel has been closed for many years. The property owner has decided the building doesn't meet their criteria for renovating or remodeling and plans on demolishing the building. Now I'll get into the criteria that's required for the variance. Again, the applicant's requesting a variance from the use-specific conditions that the property has direct vehicular access to a minor arterial, which it does not. So criteria 1 is that there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. The subject property is currently developed with an abandoned and dilapidated building. The property has been the subject of code violations for unsightly and unsanitary conditions that the town has actively been managing for more than 10 years. There is a lack of minor arterial streets in this area of the resort development zoning district, which eliminates any uses that would be permitted in the zoning district if they were located on a minor arterial street. Therefore, staff finds the application meets the criteria because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that pertain to this particular property. Criteria 2 is that these conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. The subject property is surrounded by thriving resort and commercial uses, such as the Waterside by Spinnaker Resort, the multifamily development, Enchiladas Cafe, and a small shopping center containing Watusi restaurant, Pedals Bicycles, and a welcome center. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that apply to the subject property that do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. While there are other RD zoned properties in the vicinity that are not located on a minor arterial street and don't meet the use specific conditions, there are no other properties in the vicinity that are also developed with an abandoned and dilapidated building with unsafe and unsanitary conditions. Criteria 3, because of these conditions, the application of this ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the use of the property. The subject property is currently developed with an abandoned and dilapidated building and is ripe for redevelopment. The applicant is proposing to redevelop the site with a miniature golf course, which is classified as an outdoor commercial recreation use and is permitted with conditions in the RD zoning district. Per LMO section 16.4.102B5B, use specific conditions, the site of an outdoor commercial recreation use shall have direct vehicular access to a minor arterial street in accordance with the street hierarchy section in the LMO. This requirement was put in the LMO to provide traffic and access management, to restrict development, and to limit traffic problems. High traffic generating uses might not be appropriate on streets classified as other streets, and therefore the requirement was put in for certain uses to have direct access to a minor arterial street. While Waterside Drive is not classified as a minor arterial street, the town's traffic engineer indicates the proposed miniature golf course would generate less trips than the current hotel use, which would help mitigate why this condition was put in the LMO. The subject property is located adjacent to a timeshare development and a multifamily residential development, which could lend itself to more pedestrian traffic to the site rather than vehicular. Staff is recommending that the applicant work with the adjacent property owner to establish a bicycle and pedestrian connection on Waterside Drive to Pope Avenue. Staff did look at the other miniature golf courses on the island and found 3 facilities that do not have direct access to a minor arterial street. The access is provided either through a drive aisle of an adjacent property or located on a non-arterial street. Staff is unaware of any traffic problems concerning these sites. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that apply to the subject property that would prohibit or unreasonably restrict the use of the property. Criteria 4 is that the authorization of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or the public good, and the character of the zoning district where the property is located will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. Staff has received no letters of opposition to this variance request at the time the staff report was completed. I do understand public comment was submitted online and will be heard during the public comment portion of the meeting. The variance would provide an opportunity for an abandoned and dilapidated building to be redeveloped. There has not been any traffic issues in this area due to the current hotel use. The proposed use would generate less traffic than the current use of the property. The property is surrounded by resort development and commercial uses. Therefore, a miniature golf course is keeping in character with the surrounding uses and zoning district. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good. Since staff finds all 4 criteria met with this application, staff recommends approval. That concludes my presentation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Do you have any questions for me?
Yes, ma'am. We'll go through. We have a rotational order that we use to call upon board members to see if they have any questions. So we'll go through that process now. Dr. Ponder, your name is first in my rotational list for this matter today.
I have no questions at this time, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, your name is up next.
I have no questions at this time, Madam Chairman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, your name is up next. Oh, Mr.
Sorry.
Fingerhut.
Yep, I got
you're-
it. Yep,
Yes.
I got it. Thank you. Sorry about that again. Yeah, I do have a question for Ms. Dixon. Pertaining to the abandoned and dilapidated nature of the building, which is really, I would think, critical to your findings in numbers 1 and 2, if not even 3 as well. Does the LMO or does the town have any position on how that's to be treated if the condition that's unique is actually created by the owner of the property? I mean, this is a property that's suffering from neglect. The implication is neglect by its owner. This is a condition that the owner, if it didn't cause directly, is certainly responsible for. And I was curious of the town's position on that point.
I don't think that the town has a position on that, so to speak. I do know that the town it considers the property to be unsafe and dilapidated, and I believe will be required at some point, probably very soon, if the variance is not granted, to require the applicant to demolish the building.
Okay.
I
all
can't
right.
speak to the legal part of that. There's nothing in the LMO that talks about the upkeep of a building and that not being hardship when looking at the variance criteria.
Okay, thank you for that. That's a question I'll also ask the applicant, but I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, your turn is next.
Sure. Nicole, in reading this over, it talks about neither one of either Squire Pope Road, Pope Avenue, or Waterside Drive are not minor or major arterial streets.
Pope Avenue is a major arterial.
Okay, what is a major? Are either one of the major arterials?
Pope Avenue is?
Is a major arterial?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Then, I believe I read in here somewhere that, I think it was in Chet's notes, as mentioned that neither Pope Avenue nor Waterside Drive are designated as minor arterials, but what you're saying is Pope Avenue is a major arterial.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
That's my only question. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Walczak, it's to you.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, it's to you.
Yes. Hi, Nicole. Couple questions. Waterside Drive, which, correct me if I'm wrong, that is the direct access to this property, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Is that a public road or a privately owned road?
I believe it's privately owned right of way that was established and created when the Waterside PUD was developed.
Okay. Which to me in and of itself would require some concurrence by the owner. But without going there, what other properties are accessed by that road? Obviously the Waterside timeshare property. Are there any others that are accessed? Can you go back to the site plan?
Sure, I can go back to that. Let me share my screen again. Okay, do you see the aerial view here?
Yes.
Okay, so Waterside Drive comes in off of Pope Avenue and leads into the, so the property highlighted is the district property, the Beach Walk Hotel, but Waterside Drive leads back into the Spinnaker Resort development. And then I believe there's a private driveway that would lead down to, that's Avocet. If you give me a second, I can pull up my map instead of just looking at what's on the screen. Okay, do you see the map up on your screen?
I think we still see the site plan, Nicole,
Right.
Ms. Dixon.
Let me try it again.
Yes, ma'am.
Sorry about that. Do you see it now?
No, the same thing, unfortunately.
So if I may, Madam Chairman, that is a slightly different map. It shows a greater area than the site plan that's in Nicole's presentation.
Yes, that's Mr. Williams, the attorney for the
Okay,
applicant.
yeah, so that is the map that I was pulling up. So Waterside Drive comes back down to a private driveway that then serves as access to 3 undeveloped properties and then leads down to Lagoon Road across from Avocet. So Waterside Drive, for the majority, just serves the Spinnaker Resort and then Beach Walk Hotel.
Okay, alrighty. Did, just curious maybe, but did the original hotel, did they have or need a variance for access off of Waterside?
No, that is not a requirement for a hotel use.
Okay,
The RD zoning district, don't believe. Stop here.
but here again, if it's a private road, there would need to be some type of access agreement or easement agreement.
So for any new access improvements off of Waterside Drive, the property owner will have to obtain an encroachment permit from whoever owns that road as part of their development plan review when they do get to that point.
Okay, alrighty. Okay, thank you.
Let's see. Anything else, Ms. Loudermilk?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The next in line is the chair to ask questions, and I do have several questions. The first question I have is with regard to this area, would additional parking be required other than that provided by the hotel, the old hotel?
Parking calculations were not submitted at this point because it was just submitted as a variance and a special exception. But a parking calculation will be required when we get to the development plan review stage. And so that's where we'll look at their site plan and make sure that enough parking is provided on site. So at this point, I'm not sure if additional parking would be required, but it would have to all be maintained on site. Or
Okay.
provided on site.
Okay, you look back at the criteria. All right. I believe that you gave some testimony regarding a traffic engineer's report. Do we have the traffic engineer here to testify?
I do not.
Do we have a written report of the traffic engineer?
What I received from the traffic engineer was an email that basically indicated that the proposed use would be a fraction of a trips generated from the current albeit defunct use. And so I did not get a formal report from him, and I had a verbal conversation with him about it.
Okay, and that will be a question I have for Mr. Coltrane as the town attorney. Is that admissible into evidence, the traffic engineer's information? Mr. Coltrane?
I was clicking on the wrong buttons.
It's all right,
well,
I understand.
I mean, as I haven't heard anyone object to the testimony, and I mean, that would be a decision of the chair as to whether or not you think that's admissible.
So are you saying that there must be objection by someone other than the board members to that evidence?
Well, if you're going to get into a dispute about whether or not the board should even take it, my own view with the board is that it should probably take everything that any person chooses to offer, and then you, through your own deliberations, can decide what weight to put on it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, sir. Ms. Dixon, now back to questions to you. The town has been looking at areas for workforce housing. What about this particular site? Is that included in the town's consideration for workforce housing?
I am not aware of that information. I do not have that information. I don't know that that's a property that the town is seeking to utilize.
Are there provisions within our plan which address workforce housing and the use of dilapidated or property that might be subject for redevelopment?
I think it's general practice, and it probably is mentioned in our plan, that we do encourage the reuse of existing structures and buildings and encourage redevelopment as opposed to development on a vacant site. But I do believe that the building official has declared or is close to declaring the building unsafe and should be demolished. So I don't know that we would want to reuse that building for workforce housing.
But it, once demolished and it would be vacant, would it then be considered for workforce housing under our plan?
I do not know. The town would have to acquire the property. The town does not currently own the property.
Okay, all right. And you mentioned pedestrian and bike access to Pope Avenue. Is that a recommended condition if the board chooses to grant this variance?
It is not a recommended condition of approval. I don't know that staff didn't put it in there as a recommended condition because we can't require improvements off of the property that they do not own. But staff is strongly recommending that they do that, and we will be looking for that when we review their development plan review. We'll be looking for their cooperation with the adjacent properties to make that happen.
And would that be in the same category as an encroachment permit for access that Ms. Loudermilk asked about? Is that a condition if the board chooses to grant approval of the variance?
I don't think it needs to be a condition because staff would require that during the development plan review process.
Okay.
We wouldn't approve a site plan without them getting that encroachment permit if they're making changes to their access.
Okay, all right. And following up on Mr. Fingerhut's question, I am bothered by the consideration of the building being dilapidated, which is the responsibility of the owner, notwithstanding the time period of ownership, as that being one of the main reasons to support the criteria for a variance. It would seem as though that's a little bit difficult condition to consider because the owner is the one who has caused that condition. And as a result is now making this request. So I am troubled by that. What do you say? Anything further with regard to that condition, Ms. Dixon?
I don't really have anything else to add to that other than, like I mentioned in my staff report and previously, the site has been unused for a great amount of time, and town has been managing code violations out there for years. And I think we are looking to encourage the redevelopment of that site.
Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions from board members before we move to the presentation by the applicant?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, Mr.
I had a
Walczak.
comment about that discussion that you were having, and also would comment. Even if the hotel were vibrantly and everything was fine there, why wouldn't the owner have the opportunity, or if he wanted to remove that building and do something else there? Why does it matter for a derelict building? Wouldn't he have the right to do that? And
Is that a question for Ms. Dixon?
yeah, I mean, you're saying that essentially because it's derelict, it's a self-imposed hardship that he's trying to get a variance to do something else. But even if the building is viable, wouldn't he have the opportunity to try to do something else there if he wanted to?
Ms. Dixon.
I'm sorry, Ms. Bryson, did you want to answer or did you want me to answer?
No, ma'am, it's questions for you at this point.
Okay, all right. So any use that is permitted by right, the property owner can redevelop the site with. The issue is that the use that they have selected as a miniature golf course requires a special exception and has conditions associated with that. And one of the conditions is that the property has direct access to a minor arterial. And because they don't meet that condition, they had to apply for a variance from that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so but in other words, he couldn't turn it into a miniature golf course by the LLC. Would have to try to get a special variance. which may
They have to get a variance because they don't meet those.
hotel we're in.
And in looking at the criteria for a variance, staff has to state whether they meet it or not. And one of the reasons why we feel the site is extraordinary and exceptional is because it's an old dilapidated building.
Mhm.
We've been hoping for redevelopment of that site for many, many years. And so staff finds that as an extraordinary and exceptional condition to this property.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, sir. Any other questions of board members before we move on? Oh, Mr. Christian, go ahead.
Madam Chair, Nicole, is it but for the fact that it is not on a minor arterial, the only reason this even needs a variance?
Yes, sir.
So that is basically the focus of this discussion, is that it's not on a minor arterial. That's why they're asking for the variance.
That's why they're asking for the variance. The
Okay.
use requires special exception approval. They would be before you for the special exception.
And if it was on a minor arterial, we wouldn't even be having this conversation.
For the variance, no, we would not.
Okay.
Any other board members with questions of Ms. Dixon?
Yeah, I was.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. Loudermilk.
A question that maybe really rephrases or paraphrases Mr. Christian's questions or comments to Nicole. The criteria 1, if we removed the first 2 findings of fact that deal with the condition of the property, but retained the 3rd finding of fact, which is in fact the lack of minor arterial street status for Waterside, then would you still be supporting criteria 1 that in fact there still is an extraordinary exceptional condition to the property?
Yes, I think without those first 2 criteria or without those first 2 findings of fact, it would be hard to meet the 2nd criteria because there are other RD zone properties that don't have direct access to a minor arterial, so they wouldn't be able to have those uses that require that condition. But you know, when we look at a variance, we take all of the, you know, we look at it based on everything. So I wouldn't be able to just say, well, we'll do away with the first 2 findings of fact and we'll just look at the 3rd one, because we consider those 2 issues or those 2 findings to be critical to this application. Staff finds that the property is extraordinary because of the fact that it meets those 2 findings of fact. You know, that the property is currently developed with an abandoned, dilapidated building, that it's been the subject of code violations, you know, for many years. So that and the fact that it's not located on a minor arterial road, altogether, staff finds that they meet that criteria.
Okay, I understand your logic. Okay.
Any other questions from board members of Ms. Dixon? Hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to the presentation by Mr. Applicant. By the applicant, Mr. Williams, I understand you're here to make that presentation, so you may proceed.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. It's good to see you all again. It's been quite some time, and hopefully at some point in the not too distant future, we'll be able to see each other in person. Suffice it to say that we agree with the staff's recommendation. I don't have much else to add to it, but I will address a couple of issues. Ms. Loudermilk, the right-of-way of Waterside Drive, the hotel property has an access easement across there, so we don't need any approvals from anybody else. That is part and parcel of title to the property there. And Madam Chairman, with respect to traffic trip generation, I did detail that information in our narrative so that it all is in the record already. If you want to go back and take a look at that, and it shows that the traffic counts result in a lower trip generation rate by the miniature golf than it does by the hotel use. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has, but I think Nicole did a good job of going through the criteria. We don't have anything else to add there.
Okay, thank you, sir. This time we'll go to questions by board members. Mr. Johnson, you're first up. Questions of the applicant.
I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, questions from you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Williams, what, if anything, I guess, do you make of my question to Ms. Dixon that whether an owner-caused condition can actually be a reason to grant a variance?
I think that's a good question, but in this situation, it's not so much as an owner-caused condition as it is an owner-maintained condition. The property started deteriorating many years before my client started acquiring the units. And it was only near the end of last year that they finally acquired all the units in the condominium regime. And as you're probably aware, the nature of a condominium regime is you can't do anything with it unless you own all of the units. And finally, we have one owner who owns all of the units in the condominium regime and can do something about it. And they're ready to do something about it. They don't know what their long-term plans are for the use of the property, but the short to mid-term is they think it would be quite viable as the miniature golf use. And so that's the route that we've gone down here.
Do you believe that this application would be sustainable without considering and I'm going to say it again, the owner-caused condition of the property? Because even if the LLC that now owns all of the units didn't own all of the units for the entire period of time, as you know, condominiums are run by boards, and really all it takes is a 51% to do something with the property. So I still think that's the question I think still remains. Can this application stand if we remove the condition of the property?
Well, first of all, going back to your 51%, no, a 51% vote doesn't allow you to do anything at all with the condominium regime. Unless you own 100%, you don't own 100% of the common elements, and an owner who owns less than 100% has no right, regardless of what the board says, to change the common elements of a condominium regime. I mean, you're stuck with that. And until you own 100%, there's no way that you can do anything that affects the condition or the physical characteristics of the common elements of the regime. But over and above that, I mean, the building, the structure as there is part and parcel of the land. And I don't think you can separate it out and take a look only at part of it. The conditions are what the conditions are. And our client is interested in redeveloping the property, raising the building that's there. But in order to do so and put it to a viable use for the short to midterm, this variance is necessary.
Actually, completely understand and agree, but are you suggesting that a board of managers doesn't have the authority on upkeep of a property?
Certainly upkeep, but not change in the common elements, no.
I mean, upkeep, maintenance, preventing walls from falling down and fixing broken windows and so forth. I mean, that's the type of thing boards normally do. Wouldn't that be correct?
That is correct, yes. But the condition of the structure at the time our client acquired full ownership of it, it could well be beyond repair. I mean, our client has determined that its long-range plans that it is not feasible to try and rehabilitate the structure.
Okay, I'm going to just take one more shot at this. But can this application stand alone without the condition element, in your opinion? I mean, just by virtue of the fact that it can't be used as anything else than a hotel because of the street issue. Like, is that sufficient for this board to find that's an unnecessary hardship rather than?
We think the condition of the building is part and parcel of the hardship.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, your turn.
Chet, have your clients done any marketing studies to indicate that a miniature golf course would be a viable asset in that particular area?
I do not know the answer to that. They've just come to me and said, this is what we'd like to implement here.
All right.
But I would point out that there are no other miniature golf courses anywhere in that area. And that is the biggest tourist-oriented area of the town.
Yeah, and it sounds like that may not be the end game for that piece of property regarding your clients. But
I mentioned in the narrative that this is a short to midterm use because they have not yet determined what their long-term use. It may well turn out that this is the long-term use. I don't know the answer to that.
yeah, I mean, given what I'm seeing, this is almost a down zone of the use of that property. It would not be used as a miniature golf course to its fullest potential. At least not as a hotel. It seems a hotel would be a much busier activity and much more demanding with traffic and trips and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I'm sorry, you froze up there for a while, Mr. Christian, so I don't know that I got all your question there.
The use of a miniature golf course seems to be represented as a down zoning of this particular parcel of land. It would not be used to its maximum potential, given that the hotel would, number one, be a much higher revenue source and also generate many more trips.
Well, certainly from a traffic trip generation standpoint, the golf course use has a less of an impact than the hotel, no question about that. But keep in mind that the capital investment involved in building the miniature golf course on the one hand, as opposed to the capital investment involved in raising the structure and building a new hotel on the other hand, are vastly different. And I'm sure the I'm not an economist, but I'm sure the economics of that are vastly different.
And nothing would stand in the way from the owner of that property, Jeff, from tearing down the hotel and putting up a new hotel without the need for a variance.
That's correct.
Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Sir, thank you, sir. Mr. Walczak, your turn.
Now, whether the site is large enough to put more on minutes. In other words, can there be other things in addition to the miniature golf course?
Mr.
Or is it?
Sorry.
You're breaking up a little bit.
Yes, I wanted to see if Mr. Williams could understand you. I could understand part of you. Can you try again, Mr. Walczak?
I hear a lot of breaking up in our conversations. I don't know what's going on, but the question is, can something else also be done on that property in addition to the miniature golf? Or is it too small?
I don't know the answer to that because I haven't done the land planning, but you'll notice, I think, for the site plan for the proposed use that's included with the application, there are no other uses that are shown there.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else, Mr. Walczak? I want to make sure that we heard you.
No, that's it. It is being difficult. I'm surprised working, unless it has to do with the internet or something, but there is a lot of breakup with every. I don't know if you've noticed that.
Yes, sir. I've noticed, particularly with regard to you, I think Mr. Williams experienced some with Mr. Christian. So I want to make sure that Mr. Williams can hear the question. So if Mr. Williams, as you have done, let us know if you can't understand us. We'll try again. So
Thank you, Ms. Bryson.
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Loudermilk, let's try you.
Okay, my first question, Chad, is simply I want to say a clarification. The owner, Beach Walk Hilton Head LLC, has always been at least a partial owner since the condominium regime was created in 2006?
No, ma'am.
Okay, tell me kind of how and when Beach Walk Hilton Head LLC came into the picture.
I don't recall right off when they acquired their first unit, but the condominium regime was developed by a group from Atlanta. They created the condo, then they sold the units, ostensibly as, a condo hotel, here, buy these units, and when you're not using them, we'll rent them out for you. And then along comes 2008 and 2009, and the economy crashed. And people stopped paying their regime fees. They stopped paying their mortgage payments. And a lot of them just basically walked away from the hotel project as a whole. Sometime after that point is when Beach Walk started acquiring the units, and they bought some by negotiated sales, some at tax sales, some at foreclosure sales. But it's taken them this long, you know, I mean,
Okay.
10 or 12 years to cobble together the ownership of all of the units.
Okay, that answers that question. And then my other question, and again, I'm not an attorney, so I'm just asking you maybe to expand on. You mentioned there is an access easement on record that goes with the deed to the property. I understand that part, but it is unchallenged even if the new use of the property requires a variance or an exception?
Yeah, the access easement is not tied to any particular use of the property. It's tied to the ownership of the property.
Mhm. Oh, okay, all right, I get it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, your turn.
What do you mean by long-term and short-term in regard to plans for that property? What does that actually translate into?
I don't know that I can give you a specific answer to that, but this use is what our clients have deemed to be a viable use of the property until the point where they can settle on a long-term use. And like I say, it may turn out the long-term use is the miniature golf facility. I don't know. It may be another hotel. It may be some other sort of development.
Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So now it's down to the chair, Mr. Williams. I did review your narrative, and with regard to the traffic engineer question that I asked earlier, that was because the staff was offering some testimony without direct testimony or with regard to any documents. But I note that you quote the international,
The Institute of Traffic Engineers.
sorry,
ITE.
Institute of Transportation Engineers, Trip Generation International Report, 8th edition. But in that, and I read your footnotes as well. You notice that the report provides weekday PM hour, or sorry, peak weekday PM hour for a miniature golf course, but not AM due to your suspicion that there's not a lot of use in the AM. Any other evidence that you have with regard to the traffic because of the issue of the minor arterial?
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. Do you have any question about the hearsay evidence provided by Ms. Dixon with regard to the town's traffic engineer?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Let me look back at the other questions. I think you've been asked questions about other possible uses, and the recommendation of staff with regard to providing pedestrian and bicycle access to Pope Avenue. Do you know whether or not your client would have any objection to complying with that recommendation?
I do not. I have not discussed that with him.
Okay. Do you know whether or not the access easement that you have would allow for such an access?
I don't recall right off, but I could go back and check, but I don't recall right off.
Okay, all right. Do you know the width of that access from
50
Pope
feet.
Avenue?
It's a 50-foot wide access right of way.
Okay, all right.
And
And
that's shown on attachment C to the narrative.
Okay, thank you, sir. Of that, how much is paved area? Do you know? Is that shown? I have trouble sometimes making my map large enough to read those small numbers.
Again, I'm not a traffic engineer, but I would think that the drive aisle is probably somewhere around 24 feet of pavement, but I don't know.
Okay, all right. Those are the questions that I have. Any other questions of board members for Mr. Williams? Okay, if not, we'll go. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. We'll go on to the opportunity for staff rebuttal. Ms. Dixon, there's 5 minutes opportunity absent lots of questions by the board members for you to offer rebuttal, any rebuttal.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, ma'am. And Mr. Williams, since there's no staff rebuttal, we won't offer you the SUR rebuttal opportunity at this time. But we will move to public comment. Ms. Haley, I think we understand. Lovely to hear myself echoed. Ms. Haley, I think we have public comment at this time during the public hearing.
That's correct, Madam Chair. We do have Mr. Barry Johnson on the line to give comments. Mr. Johnson, are you there? I do see Mr. Johnson is on the line. He will need to unmute himself.
I know sometimes there is a delay, Ms. Haley, between the time someone on the phone tries to unmute.
Yes, ma'am.
I may be on, yes.
Thank you, sir. You may begin your 3-minute comments.
Thank you. My name again is Barry Johnson. I'm a local attorney in this area, the firm of Johnson and Davis. We're actually headquartered in Bluffton. Our clients, Waterside by Spinnaker LP, Waterside by Spinnaker Owners Association, Inc., and SDC Properties, Inc., are immediately, they own property immediately adjacent to the Beach Walk property, the proposed mini golf development, and they clearly have an interest in the pending request before the BZA regarding a variance and a special exception use approval. The first thing I would say, and would want to say it fairly loudly, some members of the BZA who are here today were here a couple of years ago when we were before them regarding the SDC Properties Incorporated property in this area. And we loudly approve, appreciate, and applaud the intent of Beach Walk to demolish and remove the unsightly and dilapidated hotel. As a point of clarification, I don't have a map to show you, but there was discussion a little earlier that included Ms. Dixon as to what were the adjacent property owners, and I think she identified the Waterside area and the access Waterside Drive is also owned by the POA at Waterside. SDC Properties, Inc. is located immediately south of the Beach Walk property, and it is to the northeast corner of the intersection of 278 and Waterside Drive. It's a smaller piece of property, less than 2 acres. So I wanted to clarify everybody's understanding about that adjacent property. I've listened to the various comments and questions, and I know my time is short. And I will say that we would be willing and pleased to work with Mr. Williams and his client on access issues for pedestrian and bicycles. We're concerned, as I think Ms. Dixon is, about connectivity, particularly in and out of the redeveloped property for the mini golf. We're concerned about traffic signs and traffic stripings, particularly as related to the combination of vehicle, pedestrian, and bikes. We're concerned, going back to several other people's questions about what other uses could be made there. The site plan they present proposes a 2,500 square foot multi-purpose building. We would like clarification and confirmation that that 2,500 square foot building will be limited in use to the operational and maintenance center of the site's mini golf business only, and not put to some other use. And we think that's implied in Mr. Williams' narrative and in all the presentations and discussions, but we would like that clarified and confirmed. We also have
Excuse me.
concerns that are operational.
Excuse me, Mr. Johnson, this is Ms. Haley, the BZA secretary. Your 3 minutes has concluded.
Thank you, Ms. Haley. Mr. Barry Johnson, since we have a Mr. Johnson who's a member of the board, were you close to concluding your remarks? And if so, the chair would offer a little bit additional time for you to conclude.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The answer is yes, and thank you. As we're saying, we're concerned about lighting as it affects surrounding property, noise, landscaping, hours of operation. I'm guessing those may be addressed in development processes, but we would appreciate, since our properties are so contiguous to the subject site, that our clients be consulted and their concurrence be obtained on the issues that I have raised, particularly regarding the connectivity and pedestrian bicycle uses, traffic control, et cetera. Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair, for the extra time.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Ms. Haley, do we have any other public comments for this matter?
No, ma'am, we do not.
Okay. At this time, without objection, I would incorporate into the record all the evidence presented, including the reports, documents, and testimony, both the live testimony as well as the documents submitted to the board prior to this meeting. Any objection to incorporating any of that evidence into the record? Hearing none, it will be incorporated. At this time, I'll close the public hearing on this matter, and we will move to.
Madam
I'm
Chairman,
sorry.
if I may.
Yes, Mr. Williams.
Yes, regarding Mr. Mr. Barry Johnson's comments, I think he's exactly right. The items listed 1, 2, 3 of this letter are all development plan review issues, and they can be addressed there. The second 3, item number 4, actually, I don't know there's a legal way for you to give Mr. Johnson's client as essentially a veto over this approval. That's an illegal delegation of the police power, of the zoning power. You can't give a third party a vote in a zoning issue. And while I appreciate Mr. Johnson's concerns, all the 3 issues that he seems to be concerned about are all development permit issues that can be addressed at that point.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Any other evidence in support of that statement? Okay. Thank you, sir. So now at this point, without further comment or objection, we'll incorporate all of that evidence into the record. And I'd close the public hearing, without seeing Mr. Williams wanted to comment. So now I will formally close the public hearing on this matter, and we'll move to final board discussion. I would remind board members that we have a model template, or a template that might be redundant to say model template, a template for variances, and that there are opportunities for approval, denial, or approval with conditions of the variance. And so we'll open it up for board discussion before asking for a motion. So Ms. Loudermilk, your name's first in my rotation order for discussion on this matter.
Okay, I guess 2 main points that I'm thinking about. One, since in criteria 1, again, the condition of the property is critical to the consideration of not just criteria 1, but it leads into criteria 2. I'm feeling better about the inclusion of the condition of the property, since we've learned that Beach Walk Hilton Head LLC was not an original owner of the condominium regime or units. It would be delightful to have maybe more factual, dating of when their involvement started. But safe to say, given the economy during those years, the condition of the property deteriorating certainly likely started prior to Beachwalk Hilton Head LLC coming into the picture. It would be nice to know specific dating. That would be useful. But I feel better knowing they are not an original owner. And my second issue, and maybe again, it's a little bit of a question to Nicole, but the concerns of Spinnaker, i.e. the waterside condominium or timeshare complex, to the degree that those concerns are decided or required as part of the development plan. Because if we approve this variance, we then are out of the picture. We have no input into what is contained in the development plan. So I would feel, again, much better knowing that the key issues involving the neighbor would in fact need to be addressed within the development plan.
Yes, ma'am. The town is very interested in having those improvements made on the adjacent property. We will work our hardest to make sure that that happens without us approving, we won't approve the development plan without making sure that that pathway connection is part of that agreement with the adjacent property owner. And it sounds like from the comments that Barry Johnson made that they're interested in working with the Beachwalk property to ensure that that connection and pedestrian facilities are put in. But as far as the lighting and landscaping, that is all part of the development review process, and we will make sure that it's meeting the current code. We're not going to approve lighting that trespasses onto the adjacent property and impacts them. We're going to make sure that it meets the lighting standards and things like that. So they're all parts of the development review process that we'll make sure happen before we approve any.
Okay, all right. Those were really my two kind of areas of focus. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, any discussion from you before the board entertains a motion?
If I could just ask a question of the town.
Yes, ma'am.
The only thing that gives me reason to ask any questions here is the short-term, long-term issue. But before any other plan could be executed with regard to use of the property, it becomes a miniature golf course. And then there's the thought with the owner that, we could do X, Y, and Z with it. We can do something else. Before that could happen, they'd have to jump through some more hoops. Is that correct? Or as long as it were zoned properly, take it back to a hotel or, something that's in the RD zone already, they could do it without talking to anyone? Or would they have to come back and say, like, what's the process? Is this, that's the only thing that gives me a little bit of pause. So,
okay. So any use that is currently listed as a use that's permitted by right in the RD zoning district, the applicant would be allowed to go ahead and redevelop the site to one of those uses. They still have to go through our development plan review process. They still have to demonstrate that they're meeting all of our codes, but it doesn't require any action from a board. Now, if they did require, or they did propose to redevelop the site with another use that requires a special exception, then they would be back in front of you to with that application. Or if they proposed another use where they didn't meet our code and needed a variance, then they would be back in front of you. But if they are going to try to redevelop at some point in the future with a use that is permitted by right, then it does not create the need to come back to your board.
great, thanks so much. That's the only question I have, Madam Chair.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Johnson, any discussion from you?
No.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, discussion from you.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is an excellent application and an excellent proposed use for the property. What concerns me is that crediting the condition of the property as the underpinning for granting this variance, I think is a mistake, because this property suffers from neglect. And the only party that neglected it is the owner, whether it's the current applicant, whether it's other people, but this is owner neglect. And I think that using this as an extraordinary and exceptional condition, standing alone, is a mistake, because it's going to happen again where somebody has been a poor citizen and let their property go down and then come to us and said, look at my property, you have to let me do something. I do think unnecessary hardship can be found without using the side effects of neglect here. This is a hotel that it can only, right now, this can only be used as a hotel. And so if they want to do something else, they can't unless we give them a variance. I think we could find unnecessary hardship without excusing the side effects of neglect. And I think that we could still grant the variance and amend the findings of fact and conclusions of law, frankly, to strip those provisions out that give credit for the side effects of neglect and only credit the limitations of use and discuss the road issue. And that's really what's causing the need for the variance to begin with. I just think this is going to come up again. And if we give it here, we're going to have to give it somewhere else. So yes, I think it's a good application. I think it should be granted. I think that the findings of fact and conclusions of law can be trimmed down to take out what isn't necessary and maybe not create a bad precedent. And I think perhaps we could probably also put a condition on the multi-purpose building that's requested by the neighbor. Although that will arise in the development process, I think we could probably limit the granting of the variance for building a structure that's strictly ancillary to the miniature golf use and nothing else, and which is one of the things they're asking for. And I do think that it might be something that the town is involved in the approval process, but I think that's clearly a condition that we could impose.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Mr. Christian, your turn.
Yeah, a couple of comments. Again, I go back to the point, but for the fact this was not on a minor arterial road or a major arterial road, we would not be having this conversation. And there comes a point in time in a building's life where it may be, and it sounds like in this case, more costly to renovate it and bring it up to some standard than it would be to demolition it and start from scratch. And I believe these folks are probably good business people. They spent a lot of time and a lot of treasure going year by year, unit by unit, buying up every single unit as would be required in a condominium situation before they could even come forward with this application. So my hat's off to them for going through that lengthy process, which took them at least a score of years to come to this point. And now, whether it's an interim arrangement where they want to create a going concern to create a revenue stream before they go back to another hotel or other use that would be by right. Again, my hat's off to them for redevelopment. So I would be in support of this particular variance request.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Mr. Walczak, discussion from you.
Yes, first of all, I'd like to say that I do agree with David's line of thought. To me is why the applicant didn't come in with a proposed site plan to show what he was going to do property and ask for the variance and the special use consideration. We're not really seeing what the potential of this. I guess it doesn't matter, but it would have been nice to see that. And I also agree that perhaps there should be a provision there where we approve the variance, but with that exception, the miniature golf course. So that's my comments.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Madam Chair,
yes,
could I
yes,
just
ma'am.
add that the applicant did submit a conceptual site plan. It was in your packet. it was not reviewed for development plan review purposes, but it was submitted as part of the applicant's packet. So you should have received that, and I can bring it up on the screen if you need it.
Could you
Mr.
please-
Walczak?
I did not see a package come to me. And everything else, but never got the entire package showing everything. I had to go to the website to look for it. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, we heard you. You did not receive the package for today's meeting. You went to the website.
Right.
Would it be helpful for you at this time to see that site plan?
Yes, Nicole could put it up on the screen. That'd be great.
Yes, Ms. Dixon, it looks as though she's looking for it right
I-
now to put it
I
up on
am.
the screen. Thank you, ma'am.
Madam Chair, I have a procedural question.
Yes, Dr. Ponder.
Are we allowed to ask each other points of clarification?
I
I have
think
a
it's,
question about something that one of my fellow board members has said.
I think it's part of the discussion if we're trying to figure out what to do. I think it'd be okay to ask someone and they can decide if they want to answer and how they want to answer. So I see we see the site plan. Can you hold off on your question until we look at that?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. All right, Mr. Walczak, can you see that screen sharing by Ms. Dixon with the site plan
Yes, I can. Now I see
And-
it. Yes.
and other board members as well?
Okay, that's basic. I just wanted to see how it filled the site. Unfortunately, again, I went to the, by the way, do we format in the town? That's the first time I got into it. So probably fault for not seeing all. So apologize, but appreciate getting it up now.
Okay. Is there anything that you need to ask about or discuss with regard to the site plan?
See that the site plan is full. So there's no any further development other than that, the way it looks. And, but again, I think we should have that proviso that it's the variant pending this particular, use of the property.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Ponder, you wanted to ask one of us a question. Go ahead.
Sure, for Mr. Fingerhut. At this point, I don't have the same concerns that you just registered, but I want to understand why you have these concerns about what you're considering simply owner neglect. If you play that out, my assumption is that you are concerned about what will happen if this plays out and becomes a precedent of some kind. And I kind of want to understand what's the pitfall? What is the problem you see, the potential problem that you see? Why are you so concerned about this? Because I don't see it, and I want to.
Sure. No, I appreciate that. Thank you for the question. The reason this concerns me is the application of the LMO in finding a variance, requires our finding that applying the law strictly as written would create an unnecessary hardship. So it almost has a principle of equity to it. In other words, it's an equitable request. It's not fair to apply the law strictly because of these criteria. They're hurting me as an owner, restricting my reasonable use of my property. By permitting the side effects of neglect or failure to maintain to be the underpinning of that request, it's sort of like, it's as just a means of an example, it's like the person who kills their parents and comes to court and begs for mercy because he's an orphan. This is and I just think it's a very bad policy here, and I'm not certain whether there's case law on this issue or not, because I doubt it's the first time this has occurred. But the neglect of this property didn't happen overnight, and there were many hands that are responsible for that. But
do you think that the current owner is truly one of those, materially one of those hands?
100%, yes. The current owner, in essence, bought a building that's on fire, and now that they own all of the building, they say, "My God, look, the building's on fire." I mean, it's not a surprise. They knew what they were buying when they bought it. They're sophisticated business people, I'm certain. And I just, so using that as a condition, I find it wrong and I think inequitable. I also think this application could be granted without that because there's such a limitation on how the property can be used. So it's not that I'm looking for a reason to deny the application. Actually, I'm looking for a reason to grant it. I think it's otherwise a very good change. But as a matter of policy, it does worry me, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Okay, I think then it's down to the chair with regard to discussion. I agree with Mr. Fingerhut's point of view, and I am concerned about the precedent. And I see that Mr. Coltrane is still available. Can you tell us about the case law in South Carolina with regard to a condition created by an applicant, no matter when the applicant acquired the property? Is there some case law in South Carolina with regard to a variance request when the condition has been either created or allowed to continue by an applicant?
Well, generally, the applicant who creates a problem is stuck with what they've created. But in the case of the board now, I think that the board can look at the whole of the situation here, meaning that you had this wasn't a single ownership structure that a person could come in, buy one day, and then turn around and start working on it the following day. One of the perhaps unfortunate side effects of condominium ownership is that you have, in this case, I remember some 40 some odd owners, all of whom would have to agree before the ownership could really do too much with it. Even at the point that a single entity becomes the majority owner. A single holdout can cause you a problem. So again, I think it is in it's up to the collective wisdom of the board to decide if the situation here, where you had a building in condominium ownership, where you had no unanimous, willingness to do anything with it over the years, that when an individual is ultimately able to collect 100% of the ownership and do something about it, if that's something that moves the board into believing that this was a unique situation. I mean, that's again, delivered to the feet of your wisdom to decide what to think about that. And while I understand Mr. Fingerhut's comment that, well, it could look like a precedent, it might look like a precedent for a similar situation. Whether or not you're going to have a similar situation to this at some point in the future is a wide open question. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but I think it's probably not one of the more likely things that you'll be confronted with as you move on. So again, I mean, yeah, typically you can't create your own problem and expect the Board of Zoning Appeals to bail you out. I think that the board could decide, yeah, that's what's happened here. Or I also think the board could decide that this isn't the making of this particular owner, and they're confronted with an issue that does create this sort of problem for them. I mean, I think that's a factual determination that the board's going to have to sort its way through as it decides this.
Okay, thank you, sir. Based on that, it continues to be my understanding that the owner can't, whoever the owner is and whenever they acquired it, that they can't have created or maintained a condition and then come and ask us to say that that's the reason that they should be allowed a variance. I think it's very, very troublesome for the presidential consideration. So I join Mr. Fingerhut in suggesting that whatever motion is considered, that not be included. The other thing is that, as I understand the evidence, the property was acquired sometime last year, and there was certainly time to prepare a site plan. I don't know how long that took to do, but it wasn't as though it was required yesterday. So some time has expired. So with regard to the main question, and that is whether or not to allow a variance for this not being a minor arterial, I have a lot of questions about the quality of the evidence with regard to the traffic count. I'm not going to try to guess about how many cars go to a miniature golf course versus a hotel or any other kind of use, but just looking at the type of evidence that we have before us, there's no testimony by a traffic engineer. There's no traffic counts by the town's traffic engineer been provided. The only other evidence that we have is the narrative from the attorney for the applicant with regard to the international report and the ITE report. But we don't have a copy of that portion of the report. So because our decision rests on the type of traffic that would come to and from this access, which is not a minor arterial, I'm troubled by the quality of evidence that we have to rely upon to make that determination, casting aside any personal views that anyone might have about how many cars go to a miniature golf course for whatever time of day compared to any other kind of use that might be allowed in the resort district. So that's my discussion for the board's consideration.
Madam
Yes.
Can I just add that it's typical for staff when we do our staff report and findings of fact to solicit comments and ask questions of other town staff that are in that area of expertise. So, it's typical if we have a variance for a specimen tree to be removed, where we'll get input from the natural resources planner or something like that. But we don't always ask them to participate on the call if we don't think it's going to be something that we can't answer or address. So in my conversation with the traffic engineer, he did use the ITE manual, which was noted in Chet's narrative. Those were that was the document and that Darren used and provided the information to me. So we've never formally gotten any kind of report from other staff. We rely on other staff within the town to provide comments based on their expertise of the subject. So I just wanted to add that we've never formally done that before.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate that that's maybe been a part of the practice, but I don't believe that provides us with quality evidence for a quasi-judicial board to consider. And so I'm greatly troubled by evidence that is not based upon actual testimony or actual documents produced via testimony. So I would urge the town to reconsider submitting evidence without that type of quality. Okay, so any other discussion of board members or any motion using the template? Again, the options are to approve the application based upon the findings and conclusions that have been recommended, or approve the application is subject to conditions of approval, to deny it. And I neglected to say that the template also suggests that it be remanded due to an insufficient record. Also, we do the option, not suggesting it, but just going through options of continuing a matter for in case we need additional information or evidence. So that's always an option that we have to consider. So with that, is there anyone who would like to make a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair, I'll make a motion, if
Yes,
I
sir.
may.
Mr. Fingerhut, go ahead.
Thank you. I move that the application be approved based upon the findings of fact and conclusions of law set forth in town staff report, with one change, that in items 1, 2, and 3, all reference to the dilapidated or otherwise poor condition of the property be removed.
Okay.
And then in addition, that there be a condition placed on the variance that limits the multi-purpose structure that's being proposed to be used as an operational and maintenance center of the site's miniature golf use.
Okay. Ms.
Madam
Haley.
Chairman, if I may, with respect
I'm
to
sorry. I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. At this point, you're out of order. The board is considering motion, and I need to let the board continue. And then we'll see if there's an opportunity for you to provide comments. So let me first ask Ms. Haley, did you get all of the motion from Mr. Fingerhut?
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. So now let me ask if there is a second to that motion.
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Christian. Any discussion on the motion by board members? Let me call for that first.
Yes.
Yes, sir, Mr. Christian.
It sounded like Chet had a comment. I would like to hear that comment, Madam Chair.
Okay, I was going to ask for that, if there's any objection to allowing that. Any board member with an objection to allow Mr. Williams to comment? Mr. Fingerhut, I see your screen lit up. I feel like I'm on one of those game shows where a screen lights up. I need to recognize you.
I have no objection to hearing Mr. Williams' comment.
Okay, any other board members in objection to that? Okay, Mr. Williams, please go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With respect to the condition on the use of the building, I am troubled by that because there are a slew of other by right permitted uses there that may be able to be employed in that building. And your wording, I mean, there may be a retail element that goes along with that. That is not, maintenance of the golf course. There are a number of other uses that could be employed in that building, many that are ancillary to the golf course, the mini golf course use, but others that are not. And I think Ms. Dixon will confirm that if our client wanted to utilize the land for anything else other than the miniature golf, they'd have to go through a development plan review approval for that and be able to show that they meet the parking requirements, not only for the miniature golf, but also for the other use that they want to employ there. Just another full-blown development plan review application. So I am troubled by the inclusion of that condition on there.
I see
Okay,
Mr. Fingerhut is thinking, so.
Yeah, okay, understood. I think a condition is probably still a good idea here, but something ancillary to a miniature golf use, perhaps. It's slightly broader than just operational maintenance center. But if I don't know, maybe the owners or the tenant, however this works out, decide that they want to use that to perhaps fix automobiles. Would that be okay? I mean, that's the thing. It's got to be limited in some way that isn't going to be a negative for the neighbors.
Right, but if that's a by right permitted use in the area, I mean, if it's something that you need a special exception use for, then we need to come back again. But the code assumes that the by right permitted uses there are all acceptable in that area. If it's something that needs another special exception use, then we need to come back to the board for that. But if it's a retail sales element or maybe an eating established element that may or may not be strictly ancillary to the miniature golf use, our client shouldn't be prohibited from that just because they had to get a variance based on the minor arterial requirement.
Okay, understood, but I'm not. Yeah, I guess since we're considering the variance for a stated miniature golf use, that's really the reason for the condition, to make certain that that's what it is. Again, ancillary I think is fine, but I mean, I could probably change the wording of my motion to limit the multi-purpose structure to be used as something that is ancillary to the miniature golf use. But beyond that, I think that's appropriate under these circumstances. So I could maybe modify my motion for that if the chair will permit.
And David, where I think Chet is going with that, a lot of the other miniature golf courses, they're building, they may have a football table, they may have an air hockey table. And to me, that would be an appropriate use. I mean, it's just, that's an ancillary use. It's another recreational element. And I think that's what Chet may be concerned about, that we're limiting his client from having those types of other uses, which strictly has to be miniature golf. I mean, there are lots of other, kid type and family type things that, that they may want to do in there. that are associated with the miniature golf course, and that, that may be enjoyable, and he doesn't want his client limited to just absolutely anything that's miniature golf related.
Sure, maybe there's an ice cream shop in there also, or something
Yeah.
like that.
It makes sense. I couldn't agree more. So I think we could change the wording to accommodate that, but it's not fixing automobiles, even if that might otherwise be permitted, or I don't know, perhaps opening a tavern, something that might bother the neighbors. I think this is intended to be a limitation, but I want it to be a reasonable limitation. So, ancillary to miniature golf use, I think an ice cream parlor certainly would be ancillary. I think video games, or whatever they call them now, would be ancillary to that. Other amusement type things.
Hamburgers, hot dogs, and
sure, that sounds perfectly reasonable to me. And I wouldn't want to limit that by this, but I do think that but there should be a limitation for that, because that's the variance we're granting, just this use. If there's something else you want to do, you'd have to come back and ask permission for that.
well, not necessarily to you if it's a by right permitted use.
Sure. Well, okay, fine. Agreed.
Well, it is the request is for a variance from the minor arterial requirement. So because this is what we're talking about, if you expand the uses, then you may be expanding the traffic generated for a minor arterial. And so in my view, I think that ancillary to the miniature golf course is appropriate language. If there's a question of interpretation, then the staff members could make that determination, and then it would be, again, subject to review by this board if someone appealed the staff determination. So in my view, I think ancillary to the miniature golf course would be the appropriate language and not anything broader than that. That's my 2 cents. So other board members, discussion on the motion before we call for a
Yeah, I
vote.
have 2 cents.
Yes, sir,
also.
Mr. Walczak.
In deference to your, Patsy, your comments about the traffic study, let's say, that wasn't really done. Also have a, put onto this motion to approve subject to being submitted by the applicant. Would that help?
I don't think that at this point that would help, because
and I'm sorry,
I think we'd have
Madam
to
Chairman,
see that. I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Walczak broke up again, and I didn't catch all that he had to
Okay,
say.
what I'm getting at is, it would, your concern, and I have a concern also, that there wasn't enough said about, well, how much traffic is going to be generated in comparison to the hotel. So in deference to that, should we have the applicant, as a provision of the motion, submit some type of data showing the miniature golf course is in fact going to create less traffic than a hotel? That for a fact.
And
Yeah,
Ms.
I think-
Bryce,
Did you
Madam
understand it,
Chairman, I'd
Mr.
submit that
Williams?
That's included in the narrative. And Nicole, correct me if I'm wrong, but did Darren Shoemaker, the traffic engineer, confirm that the figures that I included in the narrative are correct?
He did. He cited a different edition of the IT manual, but he came to the conclusion that the proposed miniature golf course would generate a fraction of the amount that the hotel use would. And I just wanted to also add that when
I'm sorry, Ms. Dixon, I need to stop you. We're going beyond what's already in the record. And I think I need to go back and address Mr. Walczak's question. I do believe that if we add such a condition, it would have to come, who does it then come to? Does it come back to the board for us to say, yep, now that's satisfactory evidence? So I appreciate your offer of that, but I think instead of doing it that way, we would have to continue the hearing for evidence on traffic. That'd be my preference but I appreciate your offer.
well, what I would add is just that during the development plan review process, one of the staff reviews of the site plan and use is the traffic engineer. And if there were any requirements as far as additional turn lanes or different additional traffic signals or anything like that, that would be brought up at that point. So there is going to be the review of the traffic engineer of the project when it does come in for development plan review.
Okay, let me go back to any discussion by the board on the motion. Any other discussion by the board? So I understand the motion now has been amended by the maker, Mr. Fingerhut, to add or ancillary uses related or ancillary uses to the miniature golf course. Did I have that right, Mr. Fingerhut?
Yes, that the multi-purpose structure, the use of the multi-purpose structure is to be limited to those that are customarily ancillary to a miniature golf course.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Christian, as the second to the motion, do you agree with that revision?
I do.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any further discussion on that motion, which has been revised without a need for a motion on an amendment to it because the maker and the second agreed to it? If not, Ms. Haley, will you call the roll on this motion?
Certainly, Madam Chair. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walzak. Mr. Walzak, you're muted.
Nothing's working. For
Thank you. Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson, Mr. Robert Johnson, you appear to be on mute.
For the motion.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
Against the motion.
Motion carries 6-1.
Thank you all. That concludes this matter before the board. Now we'll
Thank you,
move
Madam
on.
Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Now we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a public hearing on the special exception request 002416-2021, a request from Chester C. Williams Esquire on behalf of Beachwalk Hilton Head LLC for a special exception to allow an outdoor commercial recreation use other than a water park, especially a miniature golf course on property zone resort development, RD. The address subject to this request is 40 Waterside Drive with a parcel number of R552-018-000-202D as in David, *0. And I would remind the board that we are looking at a different procedure with regard to special exception found in the LMO in section 16-2103E and in Article 8, Roman numeral 8 of the Rules of Procedure. And we'll proceed in a similar manner. The presentation by staff, and so that Ms. Haley will not worry too much, I will now open the public hearing.
Thank
And
you,
we'll-
Madam Chair.
We'll proceed with the staff presentation. Thank you, Ms. Haley. I knew you were probably going like, Patsy, don't forget that. Ms. Dixon, you may proceed with the staff presentation. Again, the time limit of 20 minutes. Again, for the applicant, 20 minutes with the rebuttal. And Ms. Haley will be our kind and gentle timekeeper.
Great. Can you see the screen, my PowerPoint?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. Thank you. Nicole Dixon again for the record. I'll be presenting the special exception 2416-2021, which is the proposed miniature golf facility. The applicant is Chester C. Williams on behalf of Beachwalk Hilton Head LLC. He's requesting a special exception in order to develop a miniature golf course facility on the property. A miniature golf course is considered an outdoor commercial recreation use, which is permitted by special exception in the RD zoning district. I'm going to skip through the next few slides since I think we already know the location that we're talking about here in the background. And I'll go straight to the criteria for a special exception. Criteria 1 is that it will be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. Our plan addresses this application in the economy core values, strategies, and tactics. The plan calls to support sustainable redevelopment that preserves the environment, modernizes infrastructure, and creates economic benefit to the greatest extent possible. It calls to monitor areas that have high concentrations of aging structures to target for potential redevelopment, and to continue to encourage repurposing or revitalization of existing commercial spaces and structures through flexibility or incentives for redevelopment. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the application will be in accordance with the comprehensive plan. The proposed special exception application will redevelop a vacant, aging, and dilapidated structure into an outdoor recreation use, creating an economic as well as an aesthetic benefit, which is supported by the economy strategies I just mentioned. Criteria 2, that the application will comply with all regulations and standards that are generally applicable within the zoning district and that are specifically applicable to the particular type of special exception. The purpose of the RD zoning district, aside from providing for resort development, is to provide commercial development aimed at serving the island visitor. There are use standards in the LMO for an outdoor commercial recreation use in this zoning district. One of the use standards is that the site of an outdoor commercial recreation use shall have direct vehicular access to a minor arterial street. The applicant has just received variance approval from that condition. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the proposed miniature golf course is a commercial recreation use that is intended to serve the island visitor. Since the variance was approved, the proposed development will comply with all regulations and standards that are generally applicable within the RD zoning district and that are specifically applicable to this special exception use. Criteria 3 is that it will be compatible with the intensity, scale, and character of development existing or planned in the surrounding area. The application proposes an outdoor commercial recreation use in a resort development area. The subject property is surrounded by resort and commercial uses, such as the Waterside Vicinity Resort, Enchiladas Cafe, and a small shopping center containing the Watusi restaurant, pedals bicycles, and a welcome center. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the proposed use will be compatible with the existing commercial uses and development within the surrounding area. Criteria 4, that it will not cause undue traffic congestion or create a traffic hazard. The town's traffic engineer indicates the proposed miniature golf course will generate less trips than the previous use of the property, which was a hotel. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the proposed use will not cause undue traffic congestion or create any traffic hazard. Criteria 5, that it will incorporate preservation and protection of important natural features and not result in significant adverse impacts on the natural environment. The subject property is currently developed with an abandoned and dilapidated building, which will be demolished for the development of a miniature golf course. The proposed use will be located internal to the site, and all buffers will be required to be maintained and enhanced where necessary. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because there will be no impact to any natural features on site, nor will the proposed use have any adverse impact on the natural environment. Criteria 6, it will not generate needs for transportation, water supply, sewage disposal, stormwater management, solid waste collection, fire and police protection, and similar public services that cannot be adequately handled by available or provided infrastructure and facilities. The subject property is currently developed with a building and is already served by public facilities. The proposed use will continue to use the services available to the property. The subject property is located adjacent to a timeshare development and a multifamily residential development, which could lend itself to more pedestrian traffic to the site rather than vehicular. Staff is recommending that the applicant work with the adjacent property owner, as mentioned during the variance application, to establish a bicycle and pedestrian connection on Waterside Drive to Pope Avenue. Any additional infrastructure needed for the proposed use will be handled through the development plan review process. And staff finds the application meets this criteria because the site is already served and will continue to be served by adequate infrastructure and facilities. Criteria 7, that the application will not substantially injure the value of surrounding properties. The subject property is currently developed with an abandoned and dilapidated building. The property has been the subject of code violations for unsightly and unsanitary conditions that the town has actively been managing for more than 10 years. The property is surrounded by a thriving resort and commercial uses in the vicinity. The demolition of the boarded up building and its replacement with a miniature golf course will enhance the value of the surrounding property. Staff finds the application meets the criteria because the proposed use is compatible with the surrounding properties and will not injure the value of them. Criteria 8, that the application will not materially endanger the public health or safety. The subject property is currently developed with an abandoned and dilapidated building. Again, been subject to code violations for unsightly and unsanitary conditions. And the demolition of the boarded up building and its replacement with a miniature golf course will enhance the public health and safety of the area. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the proposed use will not endanger the public health or safety. Finally, staff recommends that the application is approved as all 8 criteria are met with this application. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. At this point, we'll move to questions from board members. Mr. Fingerhut, you get first crack at this one.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have no questions.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, questions from you.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walczak, questions from you.
No questions here.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, questions from you.
No questions, thank you.
Okay. Dr. Ponder, questions from you.
No questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Johnson, Robert Johnson, questions from you.
No questions, Madam Chairwoman.
Okay. So that's down to the chair. I apologize, board. I do have a couple questions. Ms. Dixon, in your presentation, you referenced the comprehensive plan, and your staff report includes certain subsections of the comprehensive plan known as our plan. So if I could direct your attention back to, I believe I'm looking for, I'll pull up my screen here. You cited from our plan under economy core value strategies and tactics 3.1, 3.3, and 3.4.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So I'm looking at those provisions, and I'm wondering exactly how the miniature golf course satisfies each one of those subsections. Can you address that for me?
Well, I think that our plan calls for redevelopment that preserves the environment, modernizes infrastructure. And so I think the redevelopment of that beach walk, the dilapidated beach walk hotel with a commercial recreation use that will preserve the natural resources on site and not impact them further meets that first core value. The second one, 3.3, monitor areas that have high concentrations of aging structures to target for potential redevelopment. I would say that structure is definitely aging, and staff supports the redevelopment of that. So it would meet that criteria or that core value. And then 3.4, continue to encourage repurposing or revitalization of commercial spaces. Again, this is a redevelopment of an aging structure. And so, repurposing that to another commercial use would meet that core value. So all 3 of those would support this application.
Okay, with regard to 3.1, preserving the environment, the application includes a site plan for the miniature golf course. Can you tell us from the site plan, will trees be removed from the site and other vegetation be removed from the site, the existing site?
Staff has not done, because it was just a concept review or plan that was submitted with the variance, staff has not done a full review of it. But I will tell you that staff will not allow the removal of trees from any buffers. And if there are any trees that are proposed to be removed internal to the site, the applicant will have to mitigate for it. But we strongly encourage the preservation of the existing trees on site. We've adopted stronger tree preservation language in the LMO in the last 2 years. So that's one of the major things we look at when reviewing a development plan review, making sure that trees and buffers are protected and enhanced where they can be. So.
Is there a definition of redevelopment within our plan?
in the hour plan, I'm not sure. I don't have that answer in front of me.
Okay. But I'm just wondering how a miniature golf course qualifies as redevelopment from the previous uses. Can you tell me that? How does a miniature golf course qualify as redevelopment?
Well, redevelopment is, I mean, I don't have the definition in front of me, but it's redeveloping a site. So by the demolition of an old dilapidated structure and developing it with another commercial use is considered redevelopment. So whether it's with a miniature golf course, whether it's with a restaurant, whether it's with another hotel use, to get rid of the old and develop it with a new modernized and new facility would be considered redevelopment.
Okay. I'm looking at subsection 3.3 of our plan, which has a subsection 3.3.1, which says research opportunities to encourage property owners of dilapidated structures to rehabilitate and convert the buildings to workforce housing as a means to provide both redevelopment and additional housing. And so can you tell me how the miniature golf course complies with that portion of our plan?
I mean, I didn't go through the entire hour plan to address every single core value in it. What we did was we looked at different areas of the hour plan that would support the proposed application, and that's what we stated in our findings of fact. So yeah, the redevelopment of the site to a miniature golf course does not in any way address workforce housing.
Yeah, the provision that I'm asking about, you cite in your staff report that it complies with 3.3 of the economy core values. And I was looking at the subsection under 3.3, 3.3.1. So it's directly related to the one you're citing. That's why I was asking about it.
Yeah, it wasn't considered for the workforce housing part of that core value. It was just the main heading where we talked about aging structures and targeting them for potential redevelopment.
Okay.
But this site is not owned by the town, so we can't, unless the town purchases the property from the current owner, we can't require or enforce that they develop it with workforce housing.
But doesn't the town have a policy on workforce housing and include incentives for private property owners for workforce housing? We do.
We've got a workforce housing program that was adopted by the town this past year with incentives for, bonus density and commercial redevelopment if an applicant chooses to go that route.
Okay, so there's no requirement for the town to own the property.
No, but there's no requirement, like the town can't require somebody redevelop the site with workforce housing. If it wishes to do that, then, and they want to be part of the workforce housing program, then there's certain parameters that they would have to meet. It's only allowed in certain zoning districts and there's certain standards that would have to be met. But they are not proposing to do that. They're proposing to develop the site with a miniature golf course.
Yeah, I'm just troubled by how this application complies with section 3.3 of our plan. So, okay. All right. Bear with me one moment. Check at my notes. And again, you've included conditions about this being a dilapidated building. So, okay. As part of your staff report. All right. Those are the questions I have of Ms. Dixon. Any other questions from board members of Ms. Dixon? Okay, hearing and seeing none. We'll move on to the presentation by the applicant. Mr. Williams, I guess you're up again.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir.
I guess I could say like everybody else did, no questions, but no, we agree with Nicole's write-up again. We think this meets all the criteria for the special use approval. We'd ask that you go ahead and approve it, but of course, we're available to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay. Let me look to my rotational chart, if you'll bear with me. Try to do this so that we don't pick on anybody to be first or last every time. So I appreciate Ms. Haley helping me out with trying to rotate folks. And certainly if somebody's got something burning to say, don't hold back. Mr. Christian, your name comes up first this time.
Nicole, with regard to workforce housing, the town has a program laid out for that presently. I know that's a moving target, but hasn't the town identified specific areas for special zoning breaks and special circumstances throughout the town? And if that is the case, I don't believe that this particular parcel of land is included in that program.
I know that the town has identified areas that we would like to see be redeveloped with workforce housing. But I can't answer with a definite whether this particular property is or is not included in that.
Okay.
I don't have that information in front of me.
Okay, from my limited knowledge of working on those things on the planning commission, I don't believe it is, but I'll seek others who may have more updated information.
I'll try to find the answer while we're on the call.
Anything else, Mr. Christian?
I'm fine, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Mr. Walczak, we'll try to hear you. Go ahead, sir.
No, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk. Oh, I think you're muted, Ms. Loudermilk.
I said, no questions, Madam Chair. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, questions from you.
None at this time, thank you.
Mr. Johnson, questions from you. Mr. Robert Johnson, board member.
I have no questions at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, questions from you.
No questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And the chair has no questions. So, Ms. Dixon, time for rebuttal for you or a follow-up response to the question of Mr. Christian regarding workforce housing?
I don't have any kind of rebuttal, and I'm still looking for the workforce housing in zoning districts that's applicable in.
Okay. Without staff rebuttal, then there would be no sir rebuttal by Mr. Williams unless there's something burning that you need to say at this point.
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, sir. At this point, any board discussion before we move to public comment? Okay, hearing and seeing none. Ms. Haley, do we have public comment on this matter?
Yes, Madam Chair, we do have Mr. Barry Johnson on the line who would like to speak to this matter as well.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Johnson? Oh,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, Ms. Haley, I interrupted you to call on him.
my apologies. Mr. Barry Johnson, if you would like to give public comment at this time, you may do so now.
All right. Am I on?
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair, just as a point of order, which I hope may not subtract from my time, may I just incorporate by reference into the record on the special exception use, my comments as made today on the variance use?
Yes, or any objection to that incorporation? Hearing none, that will be incorporated into the record.
All right, and my letter is a part of the record of both. And so in order not to belabor the board's time, I will refrain from further conversations except the reiteration of what I previously said in written. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, sir. Ms. Haley, any other public comments on this matter?
No, ma'am.
Thank you, ma'am. At this time, I will incorporate all of the evidence presented during this hearing, in addition to the staff report and the submission by the applicant, as well as the comments from Mr. Johnson representing adjoining property owners, and also the comments made by Mr. Barry Johnson, I apologize, on behalf of the adjoining property owners from the prior hearing on the variance request for the same property. Any objection to any of those documents being incorporated into the record? And I see Ms. Haley, your box lit up. Do I need to ask you something first before I go to Ms. Dixon?
No, Madam Chair, my apologies.
Okay, no problem. Ms. Dixon, you have something to add to the record?
Yeah, I was just gonna address Mr. Christian's earlier comment about workforce housing. It is not a permitted use in the resort development district. So that answers that.
Thank you for that, Nicole.
Thank you for giving me the time to look for it.
And
Okay.
If I may, Madam, as a further follow-up to that, I
Yes,
believe
Mr. Williams.
if you look at ordinance 2021-02 adopted by the town council on August 16 of 2021, you'll see that sets out the areas where the density bonus is available for housing, and it does not include the property we're talking about now.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any objection to those comments being a part of the record? If not, they'll become a part of the record. And I will close the public hearing. And we'll move on to board discussion. Again, pointing to the board that we have a template that we have previously been provided by staff and reviewed for a special exception. And I'll turn your attention to that template. And again, the options for the board to consider under that template, if you'll bear with me, I've got mine right here, are to approve the application, to approve it based on facts or conclusions separate from those recommended by the staff or in addition to those. And there are a list of, I'll remind the board, there are a list of 8 conditions which must be met. And then again, the opportunity of remanding it to staff due to insufficient record, or it can be disapproved based on either the findings recommended by the staff or based upon additional or different findings. And again, going through those 8 criteria required, or it can be approved with conditions after having made those findings and conclusions. So that is the template for the motion. And before that, we'll have discussion by board members. And that final discussion before motion, Mr. Johnson, your name, Mr. Robert Johnson, your name comes up first.
I have nothing to add.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, discussion from you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just briefly, based upon the presentation that's been made, it's my view that the special exception should be granted by the board. When evaluating the special exception, the condition of the property, at least from my perspective, is much less relevant because a variance speaks more in terms of fairness and equity on the use of an owner's use of their own property. On a special exception, this is a use that is otherwise permitted but requires this exception, and it has more to do with the public interest. So in this situation, I have no issue with any reference or finding as to the dilapidated condition of the property, because that is something that actually supports what we're doing here, as opposed to perhaps undercuts why we should permit it. So anyway, I guess I'm just explaining myself, but I would support this application.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, discussion from you.
I'm going to support this application.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Walczak, discussion from you.
Yes, no, I have nothing to say. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, discussion from you.
No additional discussion, but I do support the application.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Ponder, discussion from you.
No discussion, I'm supportive.
Thank you, ma'am. Discussion from the chair. Having voted against the variance, the chair is not prepared to support this application. So with that having been said, does someone want to make a motion on this matter?
Madam Chair, I would move based on the findings of fact and conclusions of law from the staff report that this motion be granted for the special exception.
Okay, is there a second?
Second,
Second by Mr. Fingerhut.
yes.
Any discussion on the motion? Not, Ms. Haley, will you call the roll?
Certainly. Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Robert Johnson,
For the motion.
Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
Against the motion.
Motion carries 6-1.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Williams. You're welcome as always to stay with us. But you also may be excused if you'd like to be excused. And Mr. Barry Johnson, thank you for your comments today. Again, you're welcome to stay with us, but you're welcome to also leave the meeting if you would like to.
I think I'll take my leave, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Looking at.
Thank you so much.
I think I'll take my
Yes, sir.
Madam Chair. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Barry Johnson. I was about to say, looking at the time, it's 4:40. We've been at this for about 2 hours. We have another matter to consider and then some staff reports. I'm sorry, Ms. Haley, I'm hearing an echo from me. I don't have anything else on to make that. Okay. I just want to ask the board if the board needs a recess for any reason. We could take a small recess before we continue, or we can continue.
I'm good.
I'm good.
Anybody else, personal pleasure? Okay, all right.
Continue.
We will press on then with the next matter is a variance request. It is variance 002850-2021, request from Travis Pence with the Wilson Group on behalf of Beaufort County and the Hilton Head Island Airport. The variance from LMO section 16-3-105E maximum building height in the light industrial zoning district to allow proposed renovations to the airport terminal building to exceed the maximum height of 35 feet. The subject property is located at 120 Beach City Road, and the parcel number of the property associated with this variance request is R510-008-000-0085. And I will open the public hearing on this matter. We'll follow the same procedure that we follow for variances, beginning with a presentation by staff limited to 20 minutes, with Ms. Haley again being our gentle and kind timekeeper. Ms. Dixon, I guess we're going to call on you again.
We are. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Sorry, I always check because I don't want to start going and then I get stopped like, wait, we don't know what you're talking about.
Thank you.
I'll be presenting variance 2850-2021. And just to put it out there, Terry Lewis actually prepared the staff report itself because I was out sick, but I am presenting it. So just in case there was a question about that. Let me get to slideshow here. Okay. So the applicant is Travis Pence, as you mentioned, with the Wilson Group on behalf of the Beaufort County and the Hilton Head Island Airport. He's requesting a variance from LMO section 16.3.105E, which is the maximum height standards, in order to allow proposed renovations to the airport terminal building to exceed the maximum height of 35 feet. The airport property is shown on your screen, highlighted in yellow, located mid-island. I'm sure we're all aware of where the airport is. The airport's in the process of making improvements to their site, including significant changes to the existing airport terminal building, which I have circled up on the screen in red. The need for the terminal area improvements are a result of the runway extension project completed in 2018 and the subsequent rapid airline growth. Excuse me. This plan was included in your packet. The shaded gray area is the existing terminal building, and the expansion is shown in white. The expansion will accommodate additional airlines and passengers. The existing 11,300 square foot building will be expanded by 44,989 square feet. 10,383 square feet of that expansion will be an enclosed but unheated baggage handling area, and is intended to modernize and automate the terminal operations. The remainder of the expansion will include uses such as holding rooms, baggage claim, security, screening, and offices. Beaufort County has acquired some of the adjacent lots located along Hunter Road to eliminate conflicts within the required FAA object-free area and to accommodate the terminal expansion. The existing structure is not conforming to the height standards in the LMO. The existing structure is 39 feet 2 inches when measured from the pre-development grade and 46 feet 3 inches when measured from 11 feet as required by current LMO regulations. The allowable height in the IL zoning district is 35 feet. The applicant is seeking a variance to be 11 feet 3 inches above the maximum height of 35 feet. In actuality, they will only be 4 feet 2 inches above the maximum 35 feet. The 7 feet 1 inch difference between the two is a result of an artificial baseline that is established at 11 feet, which doesn't take into consideration existing site conditions such as pre-development grade. So in looking at the elevation shown on the screen, that bottom red line is that imaginary 11-foot baseline from mean sea level. That's where height is currently measured from for all commercial uses. The top red line is the height of the existing and proposed expansion structure measured from the 11 feet mean sea level. In an effort to reduce the amount of demolition required and thus mitigate the overall construction impact, the new airport expansion has been designed to align with and tie into the existing structural frame. The existing building height will be matched and not exceeded by the proposed expansion. I'll go into the variance criteria now. For criteria 1, that there's extraordinary and exceptional conditions pertaining to the particular piece of property. The subject property is currently developed with an existing terminal building at 39 feet 2 inches, which is 4 feet 2 inches taller than the maximum allowable height in the IL zoning district when measured from the pre-development grade of 18 feet and 46 feet 3 inches when measured from 11 feet as required by the recently adopted changes to the LMO. The airport is requesting a variance to allow the expansion of the terminal building to be 11 feet 3 inches higher than the maximum allowable height, but no higher than what is currently there now. The changes to the measurement of height as adopted in March of 2021 with the associated amendments to the flood damage controls ordinance have created this artificial baseline for measuring height. This artificial baseline happens to penalize sites whose pre-development grade is above this baseline. The height of the existing terminal structure is non-conforming. The overall height of the entire structure will not change, and the additional demolition and construction impacts will occur if the new expansion cannot tie into the structural frame of what exists with the current building. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that pertain to this particular property. Criteria 2, these conditions do not generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. The nearest adjacent structures are approximately 125 feet to the northeast and 175 feet from the southwest from the proposed terminal expansion that are within or adjacent to the approach path for the airport overlay district. The county has acquired some of the adjacent lots located along Hunter Road to eliminate conflicts within the object-free area and to accommodate the terminal expansion. Staff finds the application meets this criteria because the extraordinary and exceptional conditions that apply to the subject property do not also generally apply to other properties in the vicinity. Sorry, I didn't move on to the second slide. Criteria 3 is because of these conditions, the application of this ordinance to the particular piece of property would effectively prohibit or unreasonably restrict the use of the property. The approximate 193 acre property located in the INL zoning district consists of facilities and infrastructure necessary to support a small commercial airport. The height of the existing terminal building is non-conforming. The proposed expansion will not be any taller than the height of the existing structure. The inability of the current structure to align with and tie into the existing structural frame cause additional demolition and construction impacts. Staff finds that the application meets this criteria because there are extraordinary and exceptional conditions that apply to the subject property that would prohibit and unreasonably restrict the use of the property. Criteria 4, the authorization of the variance will not be of substantial detriment to adjacent property or the public good, and the character of the zoning district where the property is located will not be harmed by the granting of the variance. Staff has received no letters of opposition to this variance request. The variance would provide an opportunity for a needed expansion that utilizes the existing structural frame to align the existing structure with the expansion. The property at almost 200 acres is keeping in character with the surrounding uses and zoning district. Staff did receive a letter along with an exhibit from the airport director stating that the proposed height is not in conflict with FAA regulations. And staff finds the application meets the criteria because the variance will not be of substantial detriment to the adjacent property or the public good. Since staff finds all 4 criteria are met with this application, staff is recommending approval. This concludes my presentation.
Thank you, ma'am. This time I'll ask for questions of Ms. Dixon by board members. And Ms. Loudermilk, you get first choice this time.
No, my only question was trying to follow all these measurements. So based on the current requirement of starting, what, 11 feet above what?
Mean sea level.
Mean sea level, okay. All right. So if we start at 11 feet, then the building comes to 46 feet, 3 inches, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And the allowable height per the LMO is 35 feet.
Correct.
Okay. All right. That's really my only question. I was trying to follow the numbers.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. Mr. Walczak, you're up next.
Questions? Thank you.
No questions for Mr. Walczak, okay. Mr. Christian,
The only comment I have at this time is, when did they start?
okay. I guess we'll ask the applicant that question. I think a lot of us want to know that one. Mr. Robert Johnson, any questions from you?
I have no questions.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Fingerhut, questions from you?
No questions, thank you.
Dr. Ponder, questions from you?
None.
Okay. Yeah. Did I miss anybody? I see Mr. Fingerhut's name was twice in my list. Did I miss any board members? Okay, then it's down to me. Ms. Dixon, thank you so much for subbing in this one. Can you go back? I think it was your slide number 6. I think that's related to Ms. Loudermilk's question about the height. And I think that's the one where you or someone else had drawn in red some lines showing something about the height. Because I was wondering how to compare what's there with what's proposed. I see it coming back up on the screen. Can you make it just a tad bigger?
Yes.
Make my screen bigger. Okay, thank you, ma'am. And I see that the bottom red line is base flood elevation, but we need to go from mean sea level below that. So the base flood elevation, is that up to the top red line, building ridge height, is that representing the current height of the building?
Yeah, so the top red line illustrates the current height. The bottom red line is where that 11 feet is measured from.
Okay,
Dashed, the lowest dashed line is 0, mean sea level.
yes,
The lowest red is the 11-foot artificial baseline.
okay. And the top dash line, is that just to show the area that we're looking at as opposed to another height?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
all right, thank you. And so this elevation, and I apologize if these are questions more for the applicant, I'm happy to defer. But is this rendering of the proposed new building?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right,
Yeah, I think it illustrates the existing portion of the existing building, but it's an exhibit that shows that the height, where the height is measured from, and that it's not going any higher than what is there now.
then the existing from ground up, so to speak, notwithstanding where mean sea level and where base flood elevation are.
Correct.
So from the ground up, okay. And the other question I have related to that, and again, you may not be able to address this question, maybe for the applicant, is the square footage of this tallest area being increased? So in other words, we've got the height of 35 feet. This is going to go beyond that, but have they widened the area that is above the 35-foot limit? That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah, so the expansion, the square footage increase will match the current height. So it will increase to, that's what the variance is requesting.
Right, I understand the height
Expansion-
is taller, but what I'm trying to understand is, if you will, as opposed to a footprint, but up in the sky, so to speak, is the area of the sky area of the 35 feet height, exceeding the 35 feet, bigger than what exists now?
Yes.
Yeah,
Okay, I see Mr. Johnson said yes, so thank you. Okay, all right. And I think when we come to the applicant, maybe I can ask that question. I'm just trying to understand not just the height, but the size, if you will, recognizing that it's in the sky as opposed to on the ground, a footprint on the ground, but just trying to understand what we're talking about expanding.
so the expansion is an additional 44,000 square feet and change. I don't know. I don't think that the entire addition is going up to that maximum height, but we can ask the applicant about
Okay.
that. But yeah, the footprint of that height is increasing.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate your trying to sub and address those questions as well. So,
Yeah, I mean, it was my application. Terry just happened to help me write the report while I was out sick.
I gotcha. Okay, thank you. Any other questions of board members before we move on to the presentation by the applicant? Okay, is Mr. Pence, are you here to make the presentation by the applicant? Oh, I see you raising your hand. I see a screen with, yes, sir. Your screen is lit up. It's your turn as a contestant. So,
thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. I have with me Brian Wilson and Ryan Janest. We're members of the architectural design team who came up with the concepts for this project in cooperation with the airport. We have also on the call John Rimble, the airport director, and also Judy Elder, who represents Talbot Wright and Ellington, and she is the civil engineer and project manager and engineer for the airport there at Hilton Head.
okay, thank you, sir.
And I can answer quickly a couple of your questions related to the height of the existing building. I don't know if we can go back to that slide 6.
We'll ask Ms. Dixon to assist us with that. Bear with us just a moment while she brings it back up and enlarges it again.
Okay,
Great.
so what you're looking at is the north end of the building. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the existing terminal or not, but what you can see at column line D, that's that vertical line with the circle and the letter D in it. That's basically where that intersects the building. That's the existing roof of the building. And everything to the left of it, where it's a straight line going out to the left, and then the lower portion between column lines F and column lines N, that's the existing hold room of the building. So if you go to the next slide, it should be slide 7. I'm sorry, we have the front elevation sheet. That's the floor plan.
Yeah, you can kind of see what the.
I think that's in their submission.
Give me a second, I'm gonna pull it up for you.
Thank you. Mr. Walczak, are you able to see these? I know you had some.
201, if that helps.
Is this the screen that you were looking for?
I'm just seeing you.
Okay, let me try again.
I think I could see it, Ms. Dixon. Any other board members having trouble seeing it?
That's it.
Ms. Dixon is showing an elevation sheet. I can't read the sheet number. It says exterior elevation sheet number A-201.
That's correct. And at the
okay.
bottom, there's a detail number 1, which is called Plan South Land Side Elevation.
Excuse me, just a minute, Mr. Pence, is that you speaking? Let me make sure all board members can see this.
I'm trying to zoom in on it so that you can see what we're talking about here.
Yes, ma'am. I want to make sure Mr. Walczak had trouble with some of the documents before. Mr. Walczak, can you see this one? Mr. Walczak?
So I can see everything. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any other board member with trouble seeing it? Okay, thank you, Mr. Pence. You may
I'm only
proceed.
having trouble hearing.
Okay.
No, it keeps cutting in and out, and I don't know what it is.
Okay, all right. You may go ahead, Mr. Pence.
Yeah, so looking at this lower drawing, roughly in the center, you'll see column line number 1. And so everything from 1 to the left is basically the existing terminal building. And so everything from 1 to the right to column line 37 is the expansion. And so as you can see, the existing building height is roughly at that area between column line 7 and 6, where we have the primary entrance to the building. And we're replicating that at column line 23. So there's one other area of the building that goes up to this existing building height. And then the rest of the building is at the lower ridge height, running all the way across. We had a couple of criteria during the design, which really kind of drove the design. One of them is that the existing building, the 11,000 some square feet of the existing building, it's going to have to remain in use while we do this expansion. And therefore, we were very limited to how much surgery we could do to that existing building while it's in operation. And so that kind of drove, as was mentioned in the criteria responses, why we are sticking with those building heights, because we're trying not to tear the roof off of the building. We're trying to just add to it where we can, in terms of conceptual elements like dormers and gables and things like that. The other criteria that we had is that we wanted to make sure that the expansion, again, that's everything from column line 1 to the right, was thematically, architecturally, a complement to the existing building and wasn't a foreign building. And the only way we could really achieve that is to maintain those same type of roof pitches and heights and massing. So those are the 2 primary reasons why we have the building design that we have.
Okay.
That's all we have.
Okay, all right. Want to make sure that you knew you could proceed if you had something else.
No, ma'am.
Okay, all right. At this time, we'll go around the horn with questions from board members. Mr. Walczak, you're first up.
Me?
Yes, sir.
No, I have no questions. I think we can move forward.
All right, thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, questions of you, including the question about timing, if you want to ask that.
Do you know when the project, if approved, would start, gentlemen?
This year.
Okay, we're talking about this year. Do you anticipate any further expansion?
It is designed for the possibility of a future expansion, but that's subject to the availability of adjacent land.
And this may be a question for John rather than you three gentlemen, how many airlines are presently serviced at the airport?
3.
John, do you want to answer that question?
Sure.
It's 3.
Yeah, Peter, it's 3. It's American, Delta, and United.
Any anticipation of that increasing in the foreseeable future? Not that I'm advocating that, just a question.
That's all going to be driven on the market. And right now, given the pandemic and that, I can only guess how that's going to go. We've benefited from it so far, Peter, but it's hard to say what happens the next couple of years.
Okay, I mean, and the 3 that you have are solid right now, John?
As far as I know, they are, yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, yes, sir. Mr. Walczak, I saw you raise your hands. Are you able to hear at this point? The questions were about when it would start. The response was this year. And the follow-up question was the number of airlines. The response was 3. Don't know whether or not keep the same 3 or expand. Is that helpful?
Yeah, no, I heard a lot of that. No, I was
Okay.
just slapping my head. That's all.
Well, I don't recommend that, but I'm not going to tell you what to do. Okay. Mr. Johnson, do you want to slap your head or do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I want to compliment them on their design.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Dr. Ponder, question from you.
None at this time.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Fingerhut, question from you.
No questions. Thank you.
Ms. Loudermilk, questions from you.
No questions, Madam Chair.
Okay. Then that's to the chair. Looking again at your sheet number A-201, as you described from the number 1 at the top over to the right to number 37. My question for the staff member was about separate from the height increase, the amount of square footage that would increase in the air, if you will, for the height variance that we're to consider. And if it's helpful to describe it by those same numbers, whatever is helpful.
Well, there's only 2. Oh, sorry.
Oh, no, it wasn't to staff. I was referring to the staff tried to address my question, but now I'm asking you the same question.
Well, there's 2 points where it hits the 39 feet. And as Travis mentions, that's at column line 23 and between column line 7 and 6. Everything else, the rest of the roof is 3 feet below that. And then, the dormers are even below that. And then as you get down to the side, then it decreases even more. So there is a certain amount of, if you want to talk about square footage that is above it, but because it's a sloped roof, it's very small. Because there's, even if it's above it, it might only be above it by a foot. So, if you do a triangle of a foot, it's a very small amount of square footage.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So yeah, it's the peak line of the roof in there,
Yes.
those 2 locations. And I don't know, but it would appear as though the point at 23, which is the new area, is that to assist with the elevation to make that elevation consistent, or is it a use requirement?
It's an architectural vocabulary element because there's really 2 entrances to the building now. There's one which is at the existing entrance, and then there's a new one which will be at the entrance to the ticket lobby. I don't know if you saw the site plan, but there's a pretty large parking expansion to the south.
Yes.
So we anticipate a lot of people that are walking into the terminal are actually going to enter at that number 23 entrance.
Okay, all right. So more of an architectural feature complementary to the existing architecture. Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah,
Okay.
you can see on that plan, there's 2 vestibules. Yeah, right there. That's the existing one and that's the new one. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. Those are my questions. Any other questions from board members of the applicant? Okay. We'll move on. Anything else from the applicant at this point?
No, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sirs and ma'am. I think there was a ma'am or two in there. Um, Rebuttal from staff to the applicant's presentation.
I don't have anything to add.
Okay. Without rebuttal from staff, we won't have a rebuttal back from the applicant unless there's, again, something burning you need to say, which we're certainly open to. Anything else from board members before we go on to to the public comment? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Haley, any public comment on this request?
Madam Chair, there are no public comment on this request.
Thank you, ma'am. At this point, without objection, I'll incorporate all of the evidence presented during this hearing, as well as the submissions by the staff and by the applicant for this variance matter. Any objection to incorporating all of that into the record?
No.
Hearing and seeing none, we'll incorporate that into the record, and we'll move on to closing the public hearing. So I will close it. Public hearing at 5:10 p.m. And we'll move on to board discussion before a motion. Mr. Fingerhut, any discussion from you?
No, other than to say that I support this application. It meets the requirements as I view it of the LMO, and I think it should be approved and done as quickly as it can be done. So
Okay,
that's it.
thank you, sir. Ms. Loudermilk, any discussion from you?
No, no further discussion, but I do support the application.
Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Walczak, discussion from you?
No, I'm done.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Christian, discussion from you?
Just to echo my colleagues' comments that I support this. This is a blend of and not enhancing tourism, but getting the tourists off the bridge. And one of the primary reasons why property owners are moving here is because they can work from home. And one of those criteria is to have a local airport close by, and we are blessed with having two.
Okay, thank you, sir. Mr. Johnson, any questions, or sorry, any discussion, please? Oops.
No discussion for me, but I'm in support of the
Thank you, sir. Dr.
process.
Ponder. Oh, thank you, sir. Dr. Ponder.
No questions. I'm supportive.
And that's to the chair, and I echo my colleagues' comments about being in support of this application. So let's move on to a motion on this matter, variance 002850-2021. Is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll move that the Board of Zoning Appeals approve the application based on those findings and facts and conclusions of law found in the staff determination.
Thank you, sir. Is there a second?
I will
Second.
second.
Second by Ms. Loudermilk. Any discussion on the motion? Hearing and seeing none. Ms. Haley, if you will call the roll.
Certainly. Mr. Christian,
For the motion.
Mr. Walczak,
For the motion.
Ms. Loudermilk,
For the motion.
Dr. Ponder,
For the motion.
Mr. Johnson,
for the motion.
Mr. Fingerhut,
For the motion.
Ms. Bryson.
For the motion.
Motion carries 7-0.
Okay, thank you to the applicant and staff. Again, you're welcome to stay with us if you'd like to, but you're welcome to be excused. Except for Ms. Dixon, you're going to have to stay, I guess.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and good luck. The next item on the agenda is board business. Other than the staff reports, the chair is not aware of any board business. Any board members aware of any other business before we move on to staff reports? Okay, hearing and seeing none, we'll move on to the staff reports. And the first item is status of appeals from the BZA to Circuit Court. Mr. Coltrane, we've been asking for an update on those as to the status. So especially that the board can be aware if there's anything we need to be alerted to with regard to our procedures or substantive considerations in those appeals or in any cases which have been decided that are not appeals from our BZA. So you're up.
Nothing new as a general matter. On the appeals that exist today, there are a number of appeals, 5 of them that came out of the Sandcastles by the Sea neighborhood last January and February. Those are still pending, although a negotiation has gone on between the town and those landowners in sort of in fits and starts. A proposal was made to them. It has not been accepted yet, so I don't want to go into any tremendous detail about what it is. And I am told, actually, I followed up with the lawyer representing those folks today before the meeting. He left me a voicemail during the meeting. They believe that they have now the participation of all of the affected owners in the area, and that we will be able to move forward with it. He does have to confirm with one of them. He has been told that that person who was disinclined or not responding perhaps, but has now surfaced and has agreed to come on, but he wants to confirm that through a personal conversation with him. And assuming that that is correct, then those appeals will all be resolved through the settlement.
Any questions of board members of Mr. Coltrane? Thank you, Mr. Coltrane. It'd be helpful for us to know what that resolution is once it is available and whatever we may know, and to see if there's anything we need to change about what we do.
Once we have the agreement completed and signed up by everyone, it'll be a public document. So yeah, you can see exactly what it is.
Okay, great. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
The next item under staff report is the waiver report. And there's a written report that was prepared by Ms. Lewick. I'm happy if any board member wants Ms. Dixon or whoever else is going to report to go through that, but we have the written report, and I think to help out with time, I just ask if there's any questions or comments of board members about that written report. Hearing and seeing none, thank you, Ms. Dixon. We're not going to grill you this time on that waiver report.
Thank you.
And I think the last item that I have under staff reports is the status of the board's request for amendments to its rules of procedure. And Ms. Dixon, are you up again?
I am. I just wanted to let y'all know, as far as the amendments to the rules, we've been asked by our legal department to hold off on any changes to the rules of procedure, because we're looking at all of the rules for all of our boards all at once to make sure that they are consistent, and so we've been asked to hold off until we can address them all at one time. I do believe that there was an inquiry to move forward with some of the amendments that were requested to be made about a year or so ago, and I believe Missy was working on that with Curtis, but I don't know the status of that because I was expecting Missy today, and but she is out sick, so I don't know the status of that. But we can update you all at the next meeting, or if we find out in the meantime, we'll let you know. Teresa will let you know. But as far as looking at making any kind of significant changes to the rules, we're going to tackle all of the boards together.
I'll ask Mr. Coltrane to address that, but I understand that based upon an inquiry I made to the town manager, that we will proceed with the amendments that we had requested at our February board meeting. So I'm hopeful that Mr. Coltrane is not going to give us different information, because we've been waiting almost a whole year on those specific amendments. And so, Mr. Coltrane, are we ready to proceed at our February meeting?
Well, that particular question is not one that I've actually been involved in. I was sent proposed language from Ms. Lewick, which I responded to earlier in the month. So I understood that the rules were in the form that everyone wanted them to be in, but I was unaware of any issue with regard to the timing of when any of these were coming forward, and that wasn't part of my conversation with Missy. It was about the substance of what was proposed.
Okay. Well, I can report to the board that I have become very, very concerned about the delay in our request since it's almost a year. I know it's a year since I had first discussions with the staff about these amendments, and I'm looking at an email. So I did inquire of the town manager about the delay. This is an email to me dated January 11, 2022 from Ms. Lewick, which states that the following: good afternoon, Patsy. I understand you inquired with the town manager related to the status of the BZA Rules of Procedure Amendment. It was decided that the rules needed additional internal review, which included a review by the town attorney. The town attorney has now completed his review, and the draft rules are currently in the final stages of internal review. We anticipate the rules to come to the BZA at the February 28 meeting. We understand the amendment has taken a long time, but please know the town is committed to bringing the rules amendment forward when ready. Thank you for your patience on this matter. So I certainly expect that they will be on our agenda at the February 28 meeting. Any comments from board members? Okay, we will look for that, those amendments that we asked for to be on the February 28 agenda. Any other reports from staff?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Anything else from board members before we adjourn? Mr. Christian, I see your finger up.
Just one final comment. I know from my organization, I've had a number of people out ill for obvious reasons, and I'm sure the town has not been immune to that same plague. And I want to compliment Nicole and Teresa and the people who came to work today so we could have our meeting.
Thank you.
So I think we would all agree with that. And hopefully everyone will stay safe and well as you can. Anything else before we adjourn?
Move adjournment, Madam Chair.
All right. Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Fingerhut. Oh, any discussion? Okay, good. Without objection, we'll note that vote was unanimous, and we adjourned at 5:21 p.m. by my computer clock. Thank you all for your
Good job,
patience and
everybody.
your good work. And thank you to the staff and Mr. Coltrane. We adjourned.
Bye, everyone.